All right, so welcome to our next call. My colleagues Chahid and Duk will tell you all about the new powers and how to unlock them regarding the UI5 web component table.
Hi everyone, hope you had a good UI5 con so far. I'm Duk, I'm a framework developer for UI5. This is Chahid, our development architect for the tables controls. He's looking a bit different today due to the lighting. So yeah, unfortunately not in the spacesuit today. We will talk a bit today about the UI5 web components table and the new features and the new control that we've introduced. Maybe if you are familiar or keeping up with UI5 web components, you've already seen this blog entry here. Basically in this blog we announced finally that we've moved the table web component out of its experimental state in a productive state. And yeah, we want to just use this opportunity today to talk to you a bit about why we did all these changes, what has changed, and how you can benefit from those changes. Short thing to the agenda, I'll talk a bit about the motivation of why we switched, then talk about what's actually new, then we'll talk about our new concept that we've introduced, the feature concept, and afterwards, it's not a migration guide, but it's a general demo of what can be achieved with a new web component table. So what's the motivation behind creating a new web component table? Here's a short timeline for it. In version 1.x, we've used the old web component table. With the release of version 2, we've introduced a new web component table, replacing the old one, moving the old one into the compat package, and released this v2 table as an experimental component. And as of version 2.11, this experimental flag has been removed, so you can safely use it in a productive environment. And our three core reasons of why we did all this is accessibility. Previously, the web components table was not accessible, or at least it wasn't great with accessibility. So we've decided to just reset everything, go at it with a fresh mind, and with our motto, accessibility first. So apply all of our learnings that we've gathered from UI5 tables and the UI5 web component table and apply it to this new component. Here was especially important for us to incorporate accessibility into the core design and architecture of a component to just ensure that it's accessible by default without putting anything on top or building workarounds for it. The second major point for us, or the second major reason for this change, is harmonization. Maybe you've seen it already. There are a lot of different APIs and functionalities between different table components in the UI5 web component table world and the UI5 world. So our goal with this reset was to harmonize APIs and functionalities across the framework and ensure consistent UX across table components. So even if you use a UI5 web component table, you won't notice as a user because it's just functioning like any other table in UI5. And the third reason for us was to innovate. Resetting everything gives us a chance to revisit old APIs, incorporate new and fresh ideas, improve upon existing APIs, and leverage past findings that we had to improve the usability and development experience of our components. And that's pretty much it for our motivation. And I think the more interesting part now is going to be shown by Chahid, who will show us what's actually new.
So I would like to show what has been built so far, and I would like to introduce the new changes and also the new functionalities. And let's start with the structure of the table. So if you look at the right-hand side, this is the table structure. It is different than the one we had in the 1.x version. But if you look at the left-hand side, you will see that it is almost exactly like a real HTML table. And this is what it's really inspired us. So we really wanted to keep it as simple as a normal standard HTML table. And therefore, you can just easily see that the table tag will be changed with the UI5 table and the table header row. And what maybe you might realize is that there is no more a column, a virtual element like a column. So we define everything like a table header cell, like in the HTML/TH element. And this defines the complete table structure easily. And if you look at this, as Doug already mentioned, we come up that accessibility has to be an issue if you create such a simple structure. For example, look at this UI5 table cell. An accessibility from the cell to the column header needs to be some references, because a user, the visually impaired user, he needs to maybe just need to access the content of the cell. So it has to be, when the cell 1 is focused, column A needs to be announced. So, but the web components render always a shadow DOM, so you cannot easily combine them because shadow DOM is an isolated element. This is completely like in a prison. There are some new APIs like element internals now, but it is not fully supported in all browsers. So there needs to be accessibility has to be done already inside the element itself. And if you look at the structure, so this we are adding this directly on the web component host. That means those elements are already in the light DOM, so you can easily reference them with using just area described by, area labeled by. So we are doing all this job, and all architecture of the accessibility depends on this. And because of the role grid, we have to come up with the cell-based navigation. And all table was providing only a row-based navigation. So when you put the focus on the row, it starts reading the content of the row, but not the column headers. And if, in case of, for example, if the content is blank, this needs to be announced to the user, right? Or these people are used to use with the Excel, and they like to use cell-based navigation. And they need to press F2 to jump into the cells, like if there's an interactive element like input, link, and press F2 to jump back. And therefore, we had to implement a keyboard cell-based navigation, and this improves the accessibility. Overflow mode is changed. I mean, here you are already seeing that it's just an horizontal scroll bar. That's true. But in the grid table, we have, I think you already know that in this UI5 Classic, we have a grid table which offers only this kind of overflow handling for the horizontal. But the responsive table provides an pop-in mode, which means that when, for example, in this case, when the price column does not fit into the screen, it is shown as a pop-in. And you can see that we just allow all the features already with a single property so that you can decide as a consumer what to do with this overflow. So you don't have to select a different table type, but you just need to select a right feature of the table. So saying overflow scroll will just show the scroll bar, but pop-in handling will be showing the overflowing columns as a pop-in. Maybe you already know that in the responsive table, we are using the screen width size. That means, for example, if the screen width is set for the price column 1,000, and if the screen size is bigger than 1,000, we show it as a column, which is not good because you have to know the screen size. Old compact table in the web component, it was allowing that the table size, so minimum table size, let's say it's 1,000 pixel is set, and that means if the table is larger than 1,000 pixel, and then it was also showing as a pop-in. But this is also not ideal because what you want to just define is the min width of the column or the width of the column, and the rest will be taken care of the UI5 table about overflow handling. Row actions functionality can be implemented with just adding another just empty column, and then later on just adding some actions and buttons on it. But this is not sufficient because maybe some of the columns and it will not fit the screen and they need to shown in the pop-in area. And this one is, as you see, that there's a dedicated area for the row actions. And what you need to do is that you need to define the actions inside the row, and then that will be just shown as an action. And if you do an scroll handling, that will be stay on the right-hand side. And it will not just be hidden. And if you, for example, what we also take care always is that the footprint of the table. if you do, for example, in this case, when the menu is pressed, as you see, the table is loading a menu, which requires a pop-up. It also requires a list. Inside list item, it needs a keyboard handling. So a lot of stuff needs to be loaded, but the table keeps the footprint as less as possible. So until you really press the more button, so you don't really, it will really load nothing. And only at that moment it will load anything. So because usually tables, maybe only you use only the navigation mode, and why you should really need that, consider this. And this has been drag and drop has been asked for a long time. And you can just use it for reordering the columns or the rows. And you can also bring the rows to another table, or also you can just put them to another form or wherever you want. So what you need to do is just set the movable property of the row, and also just listen the events move over event, which will decide, for example, maybe some of the rows are not droppable at all, so that you can decide, calling prevent default and so on. And the move event will be the moment where the drop happens and move action is supposed to happen at that time. Let's have a look at the table features. So what we learned from the past is that for simple use cases, the table is already too complex. For example, I order my car, and I just get in the winter time a message that it tells me that I can activate the steering wheel heating system. That means I already paid, right? So that means already the hardware was already installed in the system. And until now, all the tables are exactly working like this. So, for example, you just set the growing property of the table, responsive table, and then what you get is all the features are already available, but maybe you will never use it, but it's still there. So therefore, we wanted to keep it as simple as possible for simple use cases, but at the same time powerful if you just plug and play. So for example, selection component that you see on the left-hand side. So if you see that slot features, so these are the features that you can add to the table. And this feature, so the table is awareness of the selection. So if you need a selection, you need to add it as a feature. So if you need, for example, growing feature, you can add this as a slot. Or maybe virtualization. And in this case, you can use it like a grid table. And this gives us a lot of simplicity, so we can keep the footprint as small as possible. You can just access the if you need a selection, for example, API, you know that you need to have a look at selection component, so you know where the APIs is available, and we can add further features into this feature slot, and it will, without increasing the footprint of the table. So I would like to a little bit make it a little faster, so you can see also the table selection feature. I think Duke is going to make a presentation. Let me just hand it over to you.
Okay. Then we'll jump right into the demo, I think. You can, if you want to have a look at it on your own, you can scan the QR code and you can actually access it. Maybe show of hands, does anybody know the React wrapper for UI5 web components? So the UI5 web components for React? Oh, a couple of people, that's great. So I've built basically a React app using these UI5 web components for React, which are just the wrapper for the UI5 web components for React, as the name says. So what it basically does is it's a little employee management system, nothing big. I've got a table here with like around 1,000 people or employees that I can scroll through, and you'll see I can just scroll pretty smoothly around it, and it's just a normal table as you would see it. Now if I go into the DOM, tell me, can you see the stuff? Probably not, right? Okay, let me increase it a bit. If I go into the table now, and we'll just have a look at the rows. How many rows are being rendered, right? We have around 1,000 employees that should be shown on the table. And I'll just go through the rows that I can see here. So I've got 1 row, I've got 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that's pretty much it. So you see if I scroll now, the data is being exchanged, so we have a virtualized table. And this is a feature that we've provided now. It's currently experimental, so use it under risk, but it might change. But essentially how it's implemented is as follows. Probably need to zoom in here as well. We have our table here, and this table just implements a couple of, so our header row, it has a couple of columns, header cells, and in this feature slot, or in this features property in React, we can put a table virtualizer in here. And this table virtualizer takes a row count, so this is the total row count that is shown in the table. It takes a row height, just says how high the individual rows are. So in our case, it's, I think, 45 pixels. And it has a on-range change event, which essentially is a bit of where the magic happens. And the magic is not that complex, at least in React. If I go into my global dashboard here, where I've implemented this range change event, you'll see that the event provides me two properties. Provides me the position of the first row that should be shown. It provides me the index of the last row that should be shown. And what I can do is, I already have the data on my client. I have here in this, somewhere in this filtered property, and I can just slice my filtered array with my first index and my last index. And this range change event is always called whenever the table needs more data or new data. So essentially, if by implementing just this simple logic, we've got a virtualized table that could virtualize up to millions of records with no downside to performance, which was quite amazing. Another thing that I want to show you is selection. So you see multi-selection is currently available, so I can just scroll up here, for example. I can just select a couple rows, and there was a change to selection here in that you are required to provide a so-called row key to the rows to uniquely identify them. So we've switched up from a index-based selection to a key-based selection, which has a multitude of different advantages. One being that even if I, for example, now change my table, I search for Charlie, the Charlie Anderson that I've selected before is still selected because it's a key-based selection. I don't need to recalculate the indices. I don't need to remember the correct indice. I just can put in the row key and be sure that this row will always be selected, which is also pretty neat. Let's move into the employee view. I think we have a bit of time. I'll try to make it quick. I think another cool feature that can be implemented now is drag and drop. So as Chad mentioned, you have the move event, you have the move over event, and basically you can see here I can reorder my rows, right? And how it's done is as follows. I just go into my team table, and you can see here I have two event listeners on move and on move over. On move over is basically just determining whether the drop indicator should be shown. On move is the actual drop action, right? And for my draggable rows or movable rows in this case, I just need to apply movable here. And if we have a look at the event handlers, it's a bit of logic. I'm not going into that. But essentially, you can then implement all that stuff yourself. So in here, it just determines the correct indice where it should be put and then replaces the element correctly. And the move over logic is just basically determining whether the indicator should be shown by preventing the default event. And I think the more interesting feature that is possible, that was also mentioned by Chahid, is dragging into other components. You see here I have my project dashboard, and I can just simply, for example, have Evan Anderson, and he's not assigned a project right now. And I can just drag him into this project B, for example, and he's assigned to the project. So I'm able to drag table rows into other components by default, or into droppable control components that allow that thing. And the logic for that is pretty simple. I just get the source, I'll get the row key, and then I can just update my employee accordingly and set the correct project. So this is all I have to do for this moving somebody into a project. And there are a multitude of other features that I'm not going into. If you're interested, we have a table export corner, and I can go into depth of what I've built here on my weekend because I was bored. You can delete people, you can show pop-in and hide pop-in. Yeah, there's a lot you can do here. But with that, that's pretty much it. I think we have a couple minutes for questions. And if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
All right, so first of all, thanks a lot for your talk. And yes, I do think we have time for a question, if there are any in the audience. I see one raised hand.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. My question would be, is there some concept for data providers? What I like by UI5, by standard UI5, is that you can use the data binding for OData, for example, and then you can easily, so what you usually do with the table, you filter, you sort it, you search it. And then with UI5 and OData binding, it's very easy. Is there some concepts or ideas to enable something like that in the web components, in the table, so we can use something like that? OData or any other kind of...
This has been asked several times, I must say. But we try to keep it away at the moment, at this level. So we try to keep it as only a UI perspective. But you already saw that from the Duke presentation, that the demo, you can easily use it with using an application framework on top of the wheel. So that's the reason why we provide all the events from Virtualizer. So it is designed in a way that you can use in the application frameworks easily. The selected component is also designed with this, that you do not need to retain the selection, or you don't need to retrieve everything. So you are free to select any kind of data provider, but use the table only for visual purposes. So this will give us power, maybe change even the rendering of the UI5 tables in the future accordingly.
All right. Anybody else? If not, the colleagues will be ready for an expert corner. Just so if you do think up a question, feel free to reach out to them. Let me say that there is ice cream in the canteen downstairs. You should have gotten a blue chip when entering. You can exchange that for some ice cream. What else? Yeah, the next session is at 4:05. Two colleagues from SAP will show us how a local app preview can facilitate your development. But now we have roughly 25 minutes of breaks. So thanks again. See you later.